Perfect. All right, you guys. So I guess we'll go ahead and begin. We had the movie Hustle, and it was just about NBA scout who previously worked for the 76ers. He was fired, traveled, and ended up discovering a Spanish street basketball player, Bo, who he's trying to get into the NBA and start his NBA career and get Stanley back into the scouting world. I chose the word or the term nationalism, which is a symbolic construct that cultivates and maintains a national identity, often through shared histories, myths, and ideologies. In the context of sport, nationalism is particularly significant as it creates a collective consciousness and kind of a sense of unity and pride. We can see this represented as Bo enters the NBA. NBA is pretty much a global stage. Everyone from around the world is watching. So for him to be a Spanish player representing his country in America, I think is a really great example of nationalism. We also see cultural differences as far as his technique and his style being represented in America. And then we also see nationalism as locals from Spain are watching him and cheering him on and having that sense of pride for their country as well. Did anyone else notice anything as far as nationalism or agree or disagree with any of that?
I think we saw a lot of different countries represented. When he was traveling to all the different countries trying to scout out players, we saw a lot of different countries represented, and then just being supportive of, their players.
I think there's a lot of pride also in just the way that Bo felt about his personal like his like Spain where he came from, and like the connection he had with his mom and his daughter. Like, not necessarily that it represents his country as a whole, but I think that it gives a good representation of where he comes from.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think there was several different examples of nationalism all throughout the movie, so I think I agree with all of that.
Yeah, that's a great thing.
Also chose globalization, which is also known as the growing network of political, economic, cultural, and social interdependencies that bind humans together across the world. And I think that was seen through Stanley's international scouting, like you were talking about earlier, Emerson, and how he was going to different countries and finding people not just from America. So that's a good example of globalization. Also, just like the integration of international players, period. There's players all throughout the NBA who aren't from America, but are playing in America. We also see that with the marketing and brand expansion and how they're actually looking for players from other countries. And it's not just hey, I was traveling and I happened to find you. The whole point of him going abroad was to find the next big player, rather than staying in his own country and looking for that. I think that was pretty interesting. And then we also see cultural exchanges as far as them watching the NBA in other countries, such as Spain, or the different techniques and styles being kind of introduced to the American players, and whatnot. Did anyone else have anything to add?
I think that one goes along with.
I think it's also. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. You're good. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that it's shown, like, the globalization is also shown in like how society is growing and increasing, like with all of the media and all the like TikTok when they started the BOA challenge or whatever. Like, it shows how globalization is growing and how it's becoming like a widespread thing and easy access to it.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's like spot on. I think that's a perfect example of that. Emerson, did you have anything you wanted to add?
She said it.
Perfect. Awesome. All right, so we will move on.
So this was mine. I had hegemony, is how I'm going to pronounce it. The whole basketball field is very male dominant, as well as in the movie we see that. We only see like 4 to 5 female characters, with only one being in a position of power, and they don't make up very much screen time throughout the whole film. And then with Vincent Merrick, the very arrogant son of Rex Merrick, who takes over when Rex dies, basically just uses his position several times against Stanley mainly, but we see him demote him back to an international scout and then override his thoughts and opinions several times. And then we see Bo Cruz's aggravated assault to get brought up whenever he first, got to the country at the airport. Vincent basically used that to knock down Bo and decrease his chances. And then kind of throughout the film, we see Stanley working with Bo and on his temper. And then we see it come to play again at the combine when Kermit gets into his head about his mom and daughter. But just very aggressive, dominant male behavior.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think the like constant theme of the aggression and the assault throughout the movie, I think is a great example of that, and how almost it was a very male dominated, like it is a very male dominated field, but even like the role that women played in it was more so, I'm sure we'll talk about this again, but more so like you see them as like the family caretakers and whatnot. There wasn't a lot of them involved in like the actual business or playing a big role in that. And then
and we only see one, and she didn't really take a position of power until the end of the film.
exactly.
She said that she was going to be taking a higher role, but
Exactly. And then the way they do present themselves, the men throughout the movie, it is very masculine and aggressive. So I completely agree. Cool.
I agree too with all of it.
okay, so I also did the framing theory. This went back to what Caitlin was talking about with the BOA challenge. The BOA challenge was made to get everyone's eyes on Bo Cruz. They wanted to get his name out there. They wanted to get these coaches and their management to see what he could do. And it was a very strategic plan to get, other people and players to post about it, which then led to sport reporters covering it. And then the interview with Vincent Merrick was very purposeful to try to hurt Bo Cruz's career and make Stanley look bad. And in the interview, Vincent said that they let go of Stanley, which is wrong because Stanley actually quit, which we saw. But both of them was just very purposeful in making the other party look good or making the other party look bad. So I thought that was a good example to use.
Yeah,
I think it's a good example to, oh, sorry.
go ahead.
I just think it's a good example for the real world and how things work, because I think that happens. I think that was a representation of what really happens in the media when it comes to sports, not just basketball, but all kinds of sports. Framing theory is definitely a big part of every single sport.
Yeah, we see, people leave out certain things or change around wording to make it appear different than it actually happened.
Yeah.
I agree. Coming from someone who's studying public relations, it's interesting. We see this a lot in the like real world, as far as, you want everything to be seen in a certain light. And so whether it's the organization trying to frame it in like the best light possible, or someone who's trying to compete with that, who wants to frame it a different way. So it's interesting to also see that in the real world and not just this film.
So I picked out racial stereotyping, and racial stereotyping or in sports, refers to the preconceived and oversimplified beliefs about abilities, behaviors, and characteristics of athletes based on their race or ethnicity. And these stereotypes influence how athletes are perceived, treated, and evaluated both on and off the field. And I picked out a scene, I don't remember his name, but at the very end during the combine, when the player was getting in Bo's head about about his country and where he comes from, just completely making him out to be whatever stereotype he has of Spain, and getting in his head about his child and his mom and making jokes about him and his mom having a child, basically just putting a whole image on him because of where he comes from.
Yeah, I agree. I think that was a good example of this stereotyping and like in a way of sport and how people use that to get to the other players, rather than
Yes.
it just stereotyping existing period. It was interesting to see how it was actually used almost like a tactic to throw him off his game.
Yeah, and it works.
Right.
And then I also did gender dynamics. So gender dynamics in sports refers to the power of relations and interactions between different genders within the context of sports, coaching, and management, as well as playing. And this includes how male and female coaches are perceived, the opportunities that are available to them, and the challenges they face due to their gender. And like Emerson brought up earlier with the female coach, not really getting a position from the start. Her brother, when their dad passed away, automatically got the coaching position. So it just shows that that was kind of the assumed that the son would get this coaching position from his dad instead of her. And it might just be the way it is because it is male basketball, but I think it does show that there are gender dynamics in all different forms of sports and their coaching positions.
Yeah, I mean, the sport of basketball is the sport of basketball, whether it's played by women
Right.
or men. And I think that if you're a good coach, you're a good coach. So if there was a female that was, qualified to be a good coach, I believe that she should have the same opportunities to make that known. And same thing with, the management. Like if she would have, had a better position, to, be the owner of the team, then I think that she should have been given a fair shot with that.
Yeah.
I agree. Okay, I think this is Greg's, so I'm going to try to get over to his thing. Here we go. I'm just gonna play his because he kind of recorded his own thing, so I'm gonna play his so that we can talk about it at the end. Oh, let's see here. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for a second and see if I can pull it back up. Well, I am having trouble playing his now. It worked earlier. Let's see. Try one more time. All right, well, it's not wanting to play, so what we're gonna do is just read through his and then we can talk about it together. Let me go back and share my screen. All right. So he had sport and activism and talked about politics in the movie and how politics plays a really large role. I completely agree that I think that there's always politics in sport. I almost think you almost need it in a way just to play the game a little bit. Does anyone else have anything to add about politics in sports?
I kind of noticed it the most with like Stanley's background, and like them using that against him, promoting him again or whatever. But we kind of see it with the management of the team and just not wanting to take certain players or, putting one player over the other.
Yeah, I think I agree with all of it, but I think politics show up when people don't even realize them, just like that. Like judging where he comes from and what he can do, and having not really learning about him yet, but just getting some idea about him. I think politics show up more than people realize.
Right, I agree with that. He also had sport religion, and in his video, he had talked about how Stanley dedicated basically his whole life to basketball and how he missed out on his own family by dedicating his life, and how when athletes tend to do that, athletes and people who end up working in the sports industry, they dedicate their lives to the sport because they love it, and so they miss out on things, and it just kind of creates this religion where, you know, the quote "ball is life" is like really prevalent. Does anyone else have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I thought one like the main scene that kind of resonated with the sport religion was whenever Stanley and Bo were training and Bo was sitting on the bench and Stanley basically was like, you have to be obsessed with this sport. He said, if you are not obsessed with the sport, like it's not gonna matter. And I would say that's kind of the key scene there with the sport religion.
Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree. I would say that even with like, if you're wanting to work in the sports industry, me personally, I'm trying to get in the sports industry, and you just, something that I've learned along the way, you really have to have a passion for it. It's so competitive. Like there's so many people trying to get into it, and there's so many people trying to play professional sports that if you're not passionate about it, if you don't make it your quote unquote religion, that, you know, chances are someone who is putting in that passion is going to get it over you. So I think that's really interesting. I thought that was a good choice for him. And I'll just turn his clip in at the same time with this so that his clip is still with all of this. I hate that I couldn't pull that up. But last thing to talk about was the intersectionality. I thought power dynamics and authority were kind of stood out a good bit to me, as far as you see Stanley, who is a white American NBA scout, over Bo, who is Spanish, person of color, and trying to make it into the NBA, he just played for fun on the streets. So you can kind of see that Stanley holds that like power over him, and he has his authority over Bo holds a significant influence over his future. And so Bo, as far as he like lives his life and plays ball, you see like certain things changing as far as his training goes. He has him running a lot more and doing different things. And Bo can't really say no because he has that authority over him. If he wants that kind of life, if he wants that future, then he's just got to do it and roll with it. So I thought that was interesting. Did anyone else see anything along those lines, or even a different part of intersectionality?
I think it's a lot more of like Stanley's influence on Bo, because Bo doesn't necessarily have to like follow Stanley's like authority or whatever, but
Yeah.
he chooses to because that's what he wants to accomplish. And Stanley is the way that he was going to get there.
Yeah.
So I think, following that is, the main thing he's kind of choosing to, but Stanley does have like the way to get him there.
Yeah, I feel like they both needed each other, but also at the same time it goes both ways, and he has to be able to trust Stanley, like even though he's over him and he has the connections to get him to where he wants to be, they still both have to trust each other. And when he found out that Stanley was lying about the Sixers backing him up and paying for everything, he got really angry and didn't want to have anything to do with him. So I think that there is power dynamics and authority, but at the same time it goes both ways, and both player and coach have to trust each other.
Yeah, I completely agree. I think that's a really great thought about that, about how, although there is this like power and authority over him, that he still, has to choose what he wants for his life, but no one is really forcing him to do it. He still has that option.
I think we see a lot of power and authority with people over Stanley. Not even just Bo, but we see all of, the other management or Vincent or whatever, just people just either denying him or just, not listening to what he has to say, overruling his decisions, stuff like that, just because they are in that position of power.
That's a really good thought. I hadn't really thought about that. Because I think I was focused more on like Bo and Stanley's relationship, but that's totally true as far as, there was a lot of other people who had power and authority over Stanley. So I think that's awesome. All right, does anyone else have anything else to add?
I think we
Yeah.
covered it.
Perfect. Well, thank you all again for showing up and for doing the work. I really appreciate it. I think that's it. So we'll stop recording now and turn it in. And if anyone else has any questions, you can reach out.
All right, perfect.
All right, thanks guys.
Thank you.
Bye.